Lovely. Good afternoon. Welcome again to our Nonprofit Success webinar series. Today, we're going to learn about some modern tips for donor acquisition. Some of you may have attended our webinar on 5 ways to build relationships and increase donor retention about 2 weeks ago. These are just 2 in a series of webinars that we have lined up for you to help you and your nonprofit succeed. So stay tuned for the upcoming ones. My name is Diana Otero. I'm with the product marketing team here at Bloomberg. Prior to Bloomberg, I volunteered as a hike leader and trail maintainer, as well as served on the board of the Nantahala Hiking Club, a nonprofit driven and powered by volunteers. So shout out to you, all nonprofit organizations that are also driven and powered by volunteers who are very close to my heart. I've been with Bloomberg for a little over 7 years now, helping fundraisers and nonprofits like yourselves. Outside of work, I enjoy traveling, reading, and learning new things. Before we start, I wanted to say as a thank you to everyone for joining us today. If you're looking for a donor CRM and you choose Bloomberg, you'll receive a 50% off onboarding for the month of June. And you can also take advantage of our donor retention guarantee. I'll talk more about our donor retention guarantee later in the presentation. I will show you some stuff in Bloomberg today because that's what I'm familiar with and what I have access to. But all of the information that we'll be sharing with you today, you'll be able to apply regardless of what donor CRM you use. We have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Today, we're going to take a look at the donor life cycle, where donor acquisition sits in that life cycle as well. We'll be focusing on donor acquisition today, but we'll talk about why it's important to look at all the stages of the life cycle and have a holistic approach to your donor acquisition retention strategy. We'll also take a look at some things you may want to consider when building a strategy for your donor acquisition. And of course, how to put that strategy into action, because unless you're putting that into action, then it's not really doing you any good. I'll also share some resources that you can take a look at for further inspiration and learning. We hope that you take a lot from the webinar today and from these resources, and that you're able to apply them to your organization. As I mentioned earlier, we'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. All right, so first, let's take a look at the donor life cycle. The concept of the donor life cycle or the donor engagement cycle has been around for many years, and you might have seen different models that are being followed or being highlighted. Some view it as an actual life cycle, like a closed loop, where a donor hears about the organization, they eventually give, and then they're cultivated until they give again. That's a fairly condensed version, but that's the idea of the loop. And the idea of the loop from awareness to cultivation is this is a very prominent model. Now, one of the things that, one of the oversights I want to point out with this model is a donor can branch out at many different points, like a donor can lapse, for example. Similarly, your nonprofit's goal isn't just to get them to give again and then recycle the loop. Your goal is to get them to engage deeper. You want your donors to be able to give more year over year, become a recurring donor or recurring giver, or become even a major donor. Another way to take a look at this is a continuous linear motion. So I have a slight preference for this model, and because through the stages of engagement, newly acquired contacts should turn into first-time donors. These donors should be cultivated to increase interest, preventing opportunities to last. This kind of reminds me, if you're a fan of the MCU and you watch the show Loki, there's several points here where the timelines might diverge. You want to keep your donors you want to keep your contacts on that same timeline, turn them into new donors, turn them into recurring donors until they get retained, they get upgraded, creating lifelong donors and advocates for your organization. As time goes on, of course, donors should eventually elevate to giving more relative to their activity, to their abilities, of course, and finally, really truly advocating for your mission. What I like to point out here is, while it is a line, This is a line that can keep stretching. It can stretch because maybe you have a longer period of time between the stages, but also it stretches in that this is a continuous motion. You want to keep that engagement going with your contacts, with your donors. And again, the goal is for those people to become lifelong donors and advocates of your organization and your mission. Now, let's take a look at the 3 stages of the donor life cycle. So from that linear model, we were able to see the 3 stages of the donor life cycle. And as you engage with your donors, creating lifelong givers is what you're striving for. We have donor acquisition, which is collecting contacts and to cultivate them into donors and welcoming new donors into your organization. So the acquisition could be creating or getting new contacts into your organization that then become donors, or activating the contacts in your database that may never have given before and turning them into first-time donors, activating that cycle of retaining them and upgrading them and lifelong giving. There is, of course, donor retention, and this is keeping your donors engaged to prevent them from lapsing and, again, to keep the relationship with your organization going. There's also donor upgrade, and this is continuing to cultivate your donor relationships and inspire recurring or major givers or even planned givers. So the view of the donor life cycle has these 3 stages. There's kind of your pre or early giving, lapse giving, elevating donors. By analyzing these 3 stages of donations, it becomes clear who needs to be communicated with and when to grow your giving. Now, there's a couple of things here, and I want people to just say in the chat, what problems do you think can arise if you only focus on a particular stage? I know today we're going to be focusing on donor acquisition. Our previous webinar, we focused on donor retention, and Bloomberg is a big proponent of donor retention. What do you think would happen if you were putting a lot of emphasis just on one of these stages? What would happen if you're only focusing on donor acquisition, or focusing mainly on retention, or focusing mainly on upgrades? I have some answers coming in here. Donors will lose interest and move to support other causes. Donors remain stagnant. It's not sustainable. You have missed opportunities. Yes. Donors will not feel part of the conversation, especially true if it feels like you're just moving them through that motion and moving them through that line or that cycle. They can feel disconnected from what's happening. I love that. The other focuses don't happen, right? If you're spending time or more time on one thing, that time has to come from somewhere. You have limited time and bandwidth, so you need to be careful about what you're focusing on. You lose the connection that donors feel that makes your organization so important. Absolutely. We'll talk more about that connection. Stagnancy, one group is bound to get overlooked or feel unincluded. Constantly having to find new donors if not doing proper retention. Absolutely. You all hit it all right on the head. So we know that there's a lot of emphasis on retention right now, and Bloomberg, again, is a big proponent of that. The focus isn't bad. Retention is very measurable, that's easy to measure and you can easily act upon. But of course, not one of these stages tells the whole story. If retention is the only part of the life cycle that you concentrate on, you'll end up eventually losing all your donors. If you're retaining donors to become lifelong donors, that's great, but they're only lifelong donors. At some point, that big constituency is going to begin to age out, and your donor database is going to be dramatically reduced because you've only focused on keeping your donors, not getting new ones. On the other hand, if you're not acquiring new donors, you are missing out on future growth but sustainability. With a focus on acquiring new donors, however, you'll spend all of your time and energy up front only to get possibly that single gift. What if that gift is small? What if they don't give again? With so much time and financial resources that go into fundraising campaigns, it's important that you're getting a positive return on those efforts. We'll talk more about that when we take a look at reports on how you can measure your donor acquisition. This is why it's important to make sure that donors give again, since a second gift actually costs you less than the first. Similarly, if you're focusing on upgrading the donors you already have, sooner or later your donors are going to get burnt out, and you're going to end up damaging that relationship that you so carefully have built. And there's so much discussion in the nonprofit world today about being more donor-centric. And you want to make sure that you're not losing your donors because you're burning them out and asking too much of them. So really, it's very important to look at this life cycle holistically. And I can't tell you which stage might be more important. That's going to be different based on where your organization is and what your organization's needs are. So it's also a good idea to take a look at where are you doing really good at right now and what are the areas you need to beef up. Is your donor acquisition really good and you need to spend a little bit more time on your donor retention? Maybe your donor retention is actually already really good, but you need to focusing on bringing new donors and new contacts into your organization. And that can help you figure out which part of the state or which stage you need a little more time in and where to spend your valuable time. We know that a lot of you are single or maybe two-person shops out there and you're wearing multiple hats. So you really need to be making effective use of your time and making sure that you're budgeting that time correctly. Now let's talk about that being said, today we're focusing on donor acquisition. So donor acquisition, as we know, is the process of obtaining new donors or contacts through fundraising and marketing efforts. And before we continue, I want to kick off a poll here. Please let me know, does your organization currently have a documented donor acquisition strategy? And maybe you have a strategy and it's well documented. I stress that here. Or maybe you have a strategy that you do tend to follow, but it is not well documented. Maybe you know it's in one or two people's head and you really need to start documenting that and writing that down. Again, that speaks to the sustainability of your organization. Perhaps you're actively working toward building and documenting one, or maybe you're just in the early planning stages, or maybe not yet, and you're not quite sure when that's going to happen yet. Again, no judgment here. We're all pretty busy and we need to budget our time accordingly, but it's good to know where you are in the process. Also, let us know, how many do you know? How many new donors you're acquiring year over year? So maybe, yes, you've been tracking it for a little while now. You have about at least 3 years of data, or maybe you just started tracking it. Maybe you started last year, maybe you're just starting this year, or maybe you don't yet. Again, no matter where you are in the process, it's good to know where you are. And later we'll talk about setting those goals so you can know how to get yourselves from where you are to where you want to be and what's realistic, because we want to make sure our goals are realistic as well. Wonderful. It looks like it looks like 10% of you have a well-documented strategy. 20% have a strategy, but it's not well documented. 19% are working on building one. 26% aren't or don't have one yet, but are planning on it. 24% of you don't have a strategy yet that's documented, and you're not sure when you're going to get to it. And it looks like 33% of you have already been tracking your donor acquisition rate for at least 3 years. 16% have just started tracking it, and 51% haven't started tracking it yet. So I hope that this webinar gives you some tips on how you can start tracking that, because there's also several different ways that you can take a look at it. Thank you for answering the poll. Okay. So an important distinction that we made here as well is between donors and contacts. Of course, acquiring new donors is the ultimate goal. And once you can get someone to give, all of those marketing efforts become worthwhile. And it should be easier to get them to give again now that they're past that first gift barrier. Depending on where these contacts or donors are in the relationship, your goals are going to be different. Now, if this person is a contact they haven't given yet, your goal with them is to continue to introduce them to your organization, show them what impact you're making and what they could be making, what impact they could be making, and nurture them toward a first gift. Once they become a donor, once they become once they give that first time gift, your goal now shifts to continuing to engage with them, or to continuing to engage them with your organization to, again, create those lifelong donors and advocates. We have a great question here in the Q&A. When someone hands you their business card, meeting them as part of a conversation or briefly at a networking event, is it okay and or good decorum to add them to your donor software system, even if you're meeting them unrelated to being a donor? This is a great question. I also asked this question out loud, so if people want to weigh in, please feel free to weigh in the chat so we can help each other out. There's several ways you can take a look at this. Of course, if you're adding them to your list, you want to at least get their permission that you're going to be sending them emails, for example. Now, whether or not those emails are asking for an actual gift, it is a big part of being able to cultivate that relationship. You want to be able to add them to your list so that you can invite them. Maybe you're going to have a tour of your facilities, or maybe you have just an event that's coming up. It may not even be a fundraising event. Everything kind of is a fundraising event, but you may not be asking them for money at these events, but you want to cultivate that relationship. So ask them. It's perfectly okay to ask them permission. Just say, can I send you more information about the organization? Or can I email you to invite you to some events we have coming up? That's perfectly fine. When they are in your database, though, you do want to practice segmentation, because you're probably communicating with them a little bit differently, or if not, you should take a look at communicating a little differently based on if they're contacts or donors. We'll take a look at a sample donor cultivation timeline later and talk about how we can extend that to new contacts as well. Thank you for that question. And there is a request to share the poll results. So I'll go ahead and do that. Again, thanks for asking. So I'll leave that up for a couple of seconds for you all. And there's another question here. Does Bloomberg have a fee of service for database tracking for nonprofits that do not have in-house staff to keep the tracking process going? You might want to take a look at some different services that we have, but there are certain things you can set up within Bloomberg. For example, you can set up reports, and you can schedule those reports to go into your inbox. So even if you're not regularly logging into Bloomberg, those insights from those reports keep coming into your inbox. So I hope that might help with that. And the beauty of Bloomberg too is it's cloud-based, so you can access it from anywhere. So you don't necessarily, even if you don't even have an office set up, you would still be able to access it from anywhere. Great questions. Thank you for that. All right. Also a good distinction here between contacts and donors. A majority of what we're going to talk about today we'll be focusing on how to turn those contacts into new donors. There's a lot of strategies out there. We can have a whole different section just on how to acquire new contacts. But today, a lot of the principles will apply to both, but we'll be focusing more on how to turn your contacts into donors. Great questions. Thank you. Okay, so when building your donor acquisition strategy, there's many factors to consider, but I kind of like to break them down into three things. First, your metrics. If you don't already have them, which a lot of you don't, it's good to take a look at what is your donor or what is your contact acquisition rate to begin with. If you're going to be focusing on turning those contacts and cultivating those relationships so that they become donors, how much are you acquiring new contacts? Apart from that, or determine your donor acquisition rate, and then determining your donor conversion rate. We'll also take a look at some acquisition channels and how to set your action plan. So in terms of your metrics, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. For your contact acquisition, you can take a look at the very basic level, how many new contacts are you adding month over month or year over year? And again, decisions like this, you'll want to talk with your organization. What's easier for you to track? What kind of bandwidth do you have to track all of this? What kind of appetite do you have to track this? Is this something that you're going to be able to commit to tracking month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year? This might also be different depending on what activities you're doing throughout the year. If you have an annual yearly event, you might see a spike at that time of the year where you're doing that event, and that can screw your averages month over month or year over year. So kind of keep those things in mind, and you'll see your natural ebbs and flows, your dips, your peaks and valleys of when you might be acquiring new contacts. Also take a look at, on the donor acquisition side, how long does it take for a new contact to become a first-time donors? Is it a month, 6 months, a year? Again, knowing where you are now helps you set realistic goals of where you want to be. For example, if right now it takes about 6 months for a new contact to become our first-time donor, do you want to bring that number down? Take a look at what activities you have between the day that they joined or the time that they joined to the time that they gave. Can you condense that timeline further? Or can you introduce some new activities earlier on in the process to reduce that time? Again, knowing where you are helps you to get to where you're going. You also want to take a look at your donor conversion rates. So this is your contacts that become donors divided by the total number of contacts times 100. I have some resources linked, so all of the resources that I'll be showing you later are links to the different resources. So don't worry about trying to scribble them down furiously. You're going to get a copy of the slides and all the links will be there. I have some resources there that talks about what's a good donor acquisition rate. I do want to caution you about metrics like that because again, maybe you're already over that number and you want to improve, and maybe you're not anywhere close to that number. And setting realistic goals for your organization is key to your success as well. You don't want to be tied down to this one number. You want to continuously improve, and it might be difficult in the beginning, but know that you're going to improve over time. We have a great question here from Karen as well. Wouldn't it make sense to keep those contacts outside your donor database until they actually make a gift? Great question. There's two schools of thought on this. And it also depends on what kind of activities you're doing within or through your donor database. For example, in Bloomerang, you can send emails out of Bloomerang. And if you want to keep track of the emails that you're sending to this contact, even if they haven't given again, maybe there's value for you to put them in your donor database so you can track those engagement activities. But maybe you have a big list that you'd prefer to keep in MailChimp, for example, before putting them in your donor database. Does your donor database talk to that outside system so that you can still keep track of that information? What's good about keeping your contacts within your donor database is you can have that full history from when they first became a contact, and you can check what activities led them to becoming a first-time donor, and you can be able to track how long it took for them to become a first-time donor. So those are kind of the pros and cons. Now, one thing you do want to keep track of is how many contacts do you have relative to how many donors that you have, and if your system charges based on how many are in your donor database. You want to weigh that of, is it worth paying for the space to have these contacts within your donor database? So there isn't one correct answer to that, but I hope those gives you some ideas of what to think about. And yes, Bloomerang does integrate with MailChimp, so you can do both. We've seen a lot of customers do that where they'll keep their contacts in MailChimp first. So they still have that history of that engagement with the contact, and then they become a donor. It's easy to put them into Bloomerang. Great questions. Okay. Next, we'll take a look at, here are a few fundraising and participation channels you can analyze for your donor and contact conversion rate. These are just samples. And if you see a couple here that's not on the, if you don't see a couple here that's not on the list that you know that your organization uses, feel free to put them in the chat. And these are just some ways where you can measure, right? And it's really all about knowing your donors and knowing where your donors come from. Like, take a look at events. Is it by, you can take a look at events by participant, by team leader or table host, levels of participation by event itself. You can start to analyze which of your events yield the most new contacts or most new donors. And again, you can budget your time where you want to spend your cultivation efforts there. You can also take a look at your different campaigns. Are most of your donors giving to a specific fund? Are most of your donations or most of your dollars coming in through membership? Are most one-time gifts or recurring givings? You can slice these up different ways. You can also take a look at sources. Maybe you do a lot of in-person events or meetings or tours. Do you get a lot of new signups from this? Maybe you do phone calls or phone-a-thons. A very effective strategy I've seen from a school and an alumni organization is they would have the students make the call. So they have the actual beneficiaries making the calls, and it makes a more powerful story hearing it straight from them. Maybe that yields the most results. Maybe events, or is it direct mail? Again, you know your constituencies best. All of these tools are here to help you, but ultimately, you can take a look at what is most effective or what has been most effective for your organization. Maybe it's website, maybe it's personal advocacy, maybe through social media or peer-to-peer. What acquisition channels are you currently using, and how are those acquisition channels performing? And this will help you concentrate your efforts on, if you find, for example, that you are getting a lot of new signups from your website and not a lot through direct mail, you can channel that energy, that time, that budget through improving that website experience. And of course, earlier we talked about setting SMART goals. We're all familiar with this, but I want to emphasize again, I tend to forget sometimes when I'm in the thick of things, so it's a good reminder. When you're setting goals for your organization around donor acquisition and anything else, it's good to be specific. Is the goal detailed enough to be useful? Is it how many new contacts do we want to acquire this year? Or how many new contacts do we want to turn into donors in the next 6 months? Be specific with your goals. Also be measurable. Can you assess whether you've reached the goal? Yes, this is the number we said, and yes, at the end of the period, we got that number. Also, is it attainable? Is the goal both ambitious and realistic? You want to push yourselves a little bit, of course, but again, we all have limited time and limited bandwidth and limited capability. So what is realistic for you and your organization? Also ask, is it relevant? Does this relate to your nonprofit's mission? How is this goal going to help further your nonprofit's mission? And of course, it needs to be measurable. Set a deadline for achieving the goal. And whether or not you achieve the goal at the end of all of this, at least you'll see some improvement. You'll get a better idea of what is attainable within that time frame, and you can adjust accordingly. Also, for time-based, I also like to take a look at is chunk them up into smaller chunks, into smaller milestones, because sometimes having a big goal can be daunting. But if you chunk them up into smaller pieces, it's a little bit better psychologically, and it makes it feel more attainable. Now, we talked about having a cultivation timeline. So here's a sample of a new donor cultivation timeline. And if you look at our linear model of the donor life cycle, imagine this new donor cultivation timeline stretching across on either side. So on the left side of the timeline, what are the activities that you want to do or that you can do so that you can get them to that first gift? And you can replicate some of the ideas, some of the communication and engagement activities you're doing for new donors into new contacts. For example, if you have a thank you call or a thank you note by mail for your new donors, you can do that with your contacts as well. Even if it's not thank you for making a donation, thank you for your interest in learning more about the organization. Thank you for being involved. Thank you for being a volunteer. Thank you for whatever it is that facilitated that introduction to your organization. And then ask them, what made you be interested in our organization, or what aspects of the organization are you interested in? I love asking new contacts and new donors this, because you can really segment based on this, and you can really personalize your approach for this contact. Now, I do recommend when you ask something like that, give them a few options of what things you're focusing on, because it's nice to have the open-ended answer, but sometimes it could be too much that it's difficult to segment by that. And then, send them newsletters. For here as a sample, for example, for new donors, we have the first, second, third newsletter. Again, that timeline can stretch indefinitely on either side. You may get a new contact that will give a first gift after 3 newsletters. Maybe you'll get a contact that will get some after the first. Maybe you'll get a contact that will become a new donor after the 5th. So imagine that timeline stretching, and it's going to be different for each contact or each donor as well. So for new donors, the focus is to get them to the next gift. And after that, again, you can kind of stretch that timeline out and to see what you can look at in terms of upgrading and keeping that relationship going. This timeline is part of the slides, so everyone will receive the timeline as well. Wonderful. Lovely. So let's talk about how do you put these strategies into practice? Because again, it's great to talk about strategy and get you thinking about what works for your organization, but how do you put some of these strategies into practice? First, let's talk about, again, I like to break it down into 3. 1, start with a solid foundation of data. We talked a lot about the different metrics you can take a look at and what questions and decisions you need to talk about within your organization to help you build that plan. Start building those reports. Again, if you're going to be focusing on new contact acquisition, start running those reports of what is our contact acquisition rate right now? What are those channels that help bring in those new contacts? If you're focusing on your new donors, how long does it take for new contacts to become new donors? What are those channels that new donors like to give? What are those channels where or activities that help us turn new contacts into new donors? Take a look at what you already have, take a look at what's working for you, and take a look at what those gaps are and what you want to focus on. Next is wealth or prospect research. Prospect research can be a great tool to help you. It can help you 2 ways. You can do prospect research in terms of just really getting new contacts into your database. I'm going to say database right now, whether or not you're using that for contacts or donors or separately. So getting new contacts into your database so that you can start researching and building that relationship. Also, this can help you discover the hidden gems that are already in your database. You might have contacts that are within your database already who have the capacity to give, who are known to give in the past, but you may not have been aware, or maybe it didn't occur to you to tap into that base. So the prospect research can help you with that. Bloomerang partners with Donor Search. I love Donor Search's system because they really take a look at two things. One, they take a look at wealth indicators. This data can help you estimate a prospect's financial capacity to give. So this is all based on publicly available data like real estate ownership, stock holdings, business affiliations, even past political contributions. So your wealth indicators talk to the capacity to give, but it also takes a look at your philanthropic indicators. A great indicator of future giving is past giving, and that's what this speaks to. These markers can indicate a prospect's warmth or affinity toward your mission. So you can take a look at some common philanthropic indicators include past donations to and involvement with similar nonprofit organizations, as well as personal information like hobbies and interests that might give an inkling if they might be inclined to support your organization as well. So this prospect research here, this is not just giving to your organization, but this takes a look at the prospect's past giving history overall. Bloomerang does integrate with Donor Search, and we have what we call a generosity meter, which already puts this into your database so that it's easy to see and it's easy to report on. So it goes from cold, cool, hot, warm, hot, and on fire. So if someone is on fire, then that they have a high capacity to give and they have past proven giving history. If maybe someone is a little on the cooler side, we maybe don't have, Donor Search maybe doesn't have enough information on them, or they don't have as big of a capacity as some of your other donors might have. Either way, that can help inform your approach with these types of donors. You'll also, another level of the integration gives you a little bit more of the generosity details and gives you some summary information. Like it already shows you what their largest charitable gift in the past has been, what their wealth capacity is, if they have business affiliations, what is their likelihood for giving an annual fund, for giving to an annual fund, or what is their likelihood for giving a major gift. Again, there's a lot of wealth prospecting or prospect research tools out there. Donor Search is just one example. But I do want to emphasize again, when you're talking about these different systems that you're using, do they talk to each other? Because in order for you to make effective use of the data, you want to be able to leverage or make the most of your CRM along with that data. We have a question here. Does generosity have any bearing on grant station research? The generosity profile will well, not the profile, but it will show you if the donor is part of a grant giving or organization. Great question. All right, so making the most of your CRM. First, you want to make sure to leverage your existing supporter base. Look for contacts who are engaged with your organization and haven't given yet. Again, your board members, volunteers, and current donors are some of the strongest advocates for your cause because they've already invested in seeing your mission to succeed. So if they haven't given yet, that may be another avenue for them to get engaged and be involved with your organization. I particularly like this, like pairing this information with the prospect research data as well, because the donor or the contact's engagement with your organization tells one side of the story, and their wealth information, the prospect research data, is a different type of story. For example, if you have someone who is highly engaged with your organization, but you can see maybe they're cool on the generosity side, that's great for your organization. They may not have a great capacity to give, but what they do, they're already giving to your organization. Or maybe they don't have a big capacity to give, but they engage with your organization in a different way. They volunteer, they attend events, they open your emails. On the flip side, you might find some contacts within your database, for example, that have high capacity but have low engagement with your organization. What's going on there? You can see that there is a bigger opportunity there to turn them into donors if they have that capacity to give. And what else can you do to engage them with your organization to get them to give that first-time gift? Another way you can leverage your existing supporters is you can turn your supporters into fundraisers, and they don't even need to actively fundraise on your behalf, but ask them to spread the word about your organization amongst their family members, their friends, their colleagues. If you have the ability to do so, you can even offer incentives to encourage supporters to do this. For example, maybe a free t-shirt if a volunteer brings another friend to volunteer. Again, take a look at what's possible within your organization. Also take a look at reactivating your lapsed donors. At one point, these were supporters of your organization. They could be again. So it's important to take a look at perhaps why they stopped giving in the past and how you can re-engage them again. You can run your SciBunt and LIBunt reports. So LIBunt, if you're not familiar, they gave last year, but unfortunately not this year, or maybe they gave some year, not necessarily last year, but unfortunately not this year. So don't overlook those hidden gems within your existing contact base. Okay. I want to actually from here jump into Bloomberg real quick to show you how you can easily create some of these reports. Now, again, no matter what database you're currently using, you can still run these types of reports. But I want to show you in Bloomberg, for example. I'm going to start off with the dashboard here, and we'll go to our reporting system. We're going to click New. And you can see here, you can build all of these reports from scratch that I'm going to show you, but we also have some pre-built templates that helps you get started. And you can modify this to fit your needs. So if we click Start from a Templates here, we have several report templates that you can take a look at, your loyal donors, top donors, newest donors, but for now, I want to show you our LIBunt and SciBunt templates. So LIBunt, constituents who gave last fiscal year, but not this fiscal year. So you can start off with that report. A couple of things I want to point out here, and again, if you're not using Bloomberg, check out how your donor database can use this, create the same type of report. One, we're taking a look at household giving. For example, maybe I have some gifts that I gave to an organization, and maybe at a different event, my husband wrote them a check. We want to take a look at the overall giving from the household, not just individuals. And then if we expand this filter here, it's looking at constituents who gave in the last fiscal year. You can adjust this date. Well, first, you can tell the system what your fiscal year is. If this is a great time of year to be taking a look at this report as well. You can adjust this if you're taking a look at fiscal year or last year, or you can adjust your date range depending on what you're taking a look at. Again, based on what your goals are, you can adjust the filters to look for or to better suit what you're looking for. So let's say for this one, we're taking a look at last fiscal year, and because it's a LIBunt, we're taking out anyone who gave this fiscal year. And I've already told the system what my fiscal year is, so it automatically knows what that is. And it's going to give me a list of, for my demo database here, I have 203 households that have given last year, but have not given this year. Again, this is one of those easy things to, and depending on how long they haven't given, it's almost like they're a new donor to your organization. And just think about reactivating those donors. A couple of things I like taking a look at is I like to add columns for their latest transaction date. When was it that the last time they gave? How much was their last gift? How much was their total in the time period that I'm looking at? In this case, we're looking at fiscal year. So if I'm filtering for fiscal year up here, I want my column to show fiscal year totals. Maybe I'm looking quarter to quarter. I'll change the filters up here to quarter. I'll change this to quarter. And how many interactions I have had or my organization has had with this constituent in the last fiscal year. If we're seeing here, for example, I have a donor who last gave last year, but I have zero. I've had zero interactions with them in the last fiscal year. Well, no wonder they haven't given again. So it can point you to some easy things that you can do to reactivate those donors. Another report template that you can take a look at is your SIBUNs, right? So your constituents who or donors who gave some years, but not this fiscal year. And this is a little bit more open. So in this case, you are going to want to add what date range you're taking a look at here. And it's really easy to do that. Just click and date, and you can select any of the dates here that you're taking a look at. So it's as easy as that. All of these reports are already built in so that you don't have to build them from scratch. It gives you a great starting point, and you can just customize based on what your organization is taking a look at. Another way to make the most of your CRM is, oops, I skipped there, segment and send personalized communications. Think about what channels are you planning on using. Again, this might depend on, earlier we asked the questions of what channels are you currently using? How effective are those channels? So think about that. What channels are you planning on using? How often are you sending communications? What's your cadence like? And again, there's no magic answer to this. Take a look at what's worked for your organization in the past and what your goals are, and this can help inform what that could look like for you moving forward. You can even take a look at, do you know if your contacts have a preferred channel? Does your database allow you to track that? Or which channels get the best responses? You know, digital might be great, but don't discount the traditional channels either. Again, that speaks to how well do you know your constituents and your donors and what's worked for you in the past? What kind of experimentation are you willing to do? And how can you make the digital communication personalized as well? Some ideas that we have here, you can show your potential donors how your nonprofit uses donations, thank them for their involvement, and share what makes an impact or how this made an impact to your mission. You can also, as a soft ask, share the direct impacts that donations can be able to make. Also share engagement pieces like a survey or petition. And what I mean by engagement pieces is what will get your donors in the habit of interacting with your messages, which will increase their knowledge of and loyalty to your cause. If you're kind of giving them those engagement pieces, then it trains them to interact with those messages. And share a story that focuses on a need. The goal will be to move your donors or to move your new contacts and donors' hearts and help them connect further and have that deeper connection with your organization and the work that you're doing. What I love about this is to show you again from Bloomberg, as an example in Bloomberg, is all those reports that we've pre-built. We can plug that report in a letter or email very easily. So I can go into an email in Bloomberg. We also have a lot of starter templates in here. I went over that quickly, so let me do that again. You'll see here, I spoke earlier, we have a MailChimp integration, so you can push donor information to MailChimp if you're sending communications out of MailChimp. But we have a lot of starter templates here, again, to help you get the ball rolling. Perhaps a new contact attended an event and you want to send them a post-event thank you email. You can start with that template. Based on your cause and your organization, customize the images that are in there. We have some built-in stock images that you can use for free, that you can search through and use for free. We have buttons in there that you can link out to more information. And this just gives you an idea of what that communication can look like. And any report that you've already built in Bloomerang, you can reference in your communications. So you don't need to build those reports all over again. You can just take that report and tell this email, hey, that report that I already built, send this email to all those people in that report. So you can customize it and tweak your report to really fine tune who you want to be in that, and then send out those communications. Another big thing is online giving platforms. More and more donors prefer to give online nowadays, so it's really important to be set up for online giving. This is not to say you should get rid of your other channels, but it makes it easier for the donor. They can make a donation when it's convenient for them and how it's convenient for them if you have these options. So feature a donation button prominently on your website. And make your online donation page visually appealing and easy to find and navigate. Make it easier for the donor to be able to give. Make it easy for the contact to just find that donate button on your page. Maybe they're not even there to make a donation. Maybe they're reading a story on your blog. Maybe they're reading an impact report. And if the donation button is right there, maybe they're moved by that story and they click on that donate button. Also good when you're building your forms, clearly identify various donor levels and their respective benefits. When people know where their money is going toward and what impact it's making, they're more likely to give, and they're more likely to give more. It's that psychological effect, right? If I give X amount and it helps 2 families, and if I just increase my donation by a little amount, it helps twice as many families, I'm more likely to give more. You can also highlight a suggested giving level on your page. Also encourage monthly giving. It's great to get those one-time donations, but again, if you can encourage them early on to give monthly, even if it's a small amount, that goes a long way toward building that relationship and building those lifelong supporters. Also, make sure your donation page is secure and mobile friendly. We always like to say, once you've set up your online giving platforms, go through the process of making a donation yourself and see what the experience is like for the donor. If you find it difficult or tricky to make a donation, or there's some confusing parts, they're going to feel the same way. So you want to see what that experience is like. So take a look at what the experience is like for the donor to make a donation. And also, of course, on your end, how easy is it for you to set up your donation pages. Also utilize peer-to-peer fundraising. Again, we've talked about existing donors, existing supporters, volunteers, board members. They're already great advocates of your organization, and it's going to be meaningful for other folks to hear why those folks support your organization, and to hear that from them firsthand. I have a couple of samples here. These are actual customers that we have and how they've used our online giving pages. For example, I really like what 20 Leaders has done here of having the donation options side by side for a one-time donation as well as a recurring donation. I also love how they've worded that of sustain our work. It shows the donor that there's different options that they might be able to support your organization. Also, just that give button there, no matter where you are on their website, there's always that give button. So again, if they feel moved to donate, even if they weren't there to make a donation to begin with, they have that option to do it. Another example here for peer-to-peer is, Having the option for anyone to create a DIY fundraiser means that anyone can fundraise on behalf of your organization. So someone can choose to donate, or if they're moved to do so, they can create their own DIY fundraiser and engage their network, their community, to be engaged with your organization too. And of course, whenever you're engaging with your donors, you want to record these engagement activities, whether maybe it's event attendance, volunteer activities, maybe they engage with you on social media, maybe you send them emails, they open the emails, or maybe they email you asking for more information. All of these engagement activities build toward that first gift. So you want to record these engagement activities so you know what works and you can replicate that and turn more of your contacts into donors. And of course, we set SMART goals earlier. You want to make sure that you're analyzing your data with your reporting. How are you progressing towards goals? Which campaigns yield the best results? So run a report in your database, again, of maybe these are your contacts who received the email, and then these are your contacts who gave a gift after receiving that email. What kind of follow-up communications are you going to have for them? Maybe you have contacts who received an email and haven't given yet. That's okay. They still have a longer way to go on that timeline. You can still stretch that out, but what are you going to do to keep them engaged, to get them to that first gift? And of course, keep track, if you aren't already doing so, keep track of your donor acquisition and donor conversion rates. So you know what's been working, and you know how to keep your organization going. I know that was a lot. I'm going to get to these questions here in a little bit, but I wanted to recap again. If you're interested, if you're currently looking for a database and maybe you decide that Bloomerang is for you, you can receive 50% off onboarding for the month of June for as a thank you for attending our webinar today. Also, we do have a donor retention guarantee. With Bloomerang, we put a big emphasis on donor retention. And if your donor retention rate doesn't improve after your first full year of using Bloomerang, you get your second year free. Don't worry, we're not just going to leave you out there without any guidance. So we actually have a couple of qualifications here. And this I like to think of this too as a checklist of what are the things that you can do during your first year. So to make sure that your retention rate goes up. For example, you have your online fundraising tools set up. That's one of the big things for donor acquisition and donor retention. So you want to get that set up quickly in your database. Thank your donors within 14 days of making a gift. Make 10 outbound calls to donors and prospects per month. These are the activities that we've seen contribute a lot to donor retention. So we want you to be able to do these activities and increase your donor retention. As I'm answering some questions here, I'd also like to put up a poll. If you are interested to learn more and you want someone from our team to follow up and to learn more about how Bloomerang can help you in your organization, please let us know in the poll. There's no commitment. We also have more of these nonprofit success webinars coming. So you can keep attending those even if you respond no to this poll. Okay, we'll take a look at some of the questions we have here. Once we have a new donor, does Bloomerang offer automation? So if you say you get 20 new donors and I have to manage their progress and set tasks for each specific new donor, this is difficult to manage effectively. That depends. So there are some things you can automate, but of course we are big proponents of that personal touch still. So you can schedule emails to go out, for example, at certain milestones. But if you want to incorporate phone calls into your strategy, for example, you may need to create tasks in Bloomberg to remind you that to do those cultivation activities. Great question. Was the donor timeline earlier meant for a specific gift range? Not necessarily. And you might also take a look at what is kind of an average gift range for your organization. The same way that you can take a look at what's a major gift for your organization, what's an average gift size for your organization, what's an average first-time gift size for your organization, what kind of an increase are you going to ask for on top of that for your second gift? We have some folks requesting for individual follow-ups. We'll get that out to you. Besides individual engagement screens, can one also do corporate partners and sponsors in a similar way? Yes, so each constituent in Bloomerang has their own constituent account with their own engagement level. So you can take a look at that on the individual level, individual people, organization level. If it's an organization constituent, you can also take a look at reports to see, for example, show me a list of all your constituents who are hot. Show me a list of all your constituents who are on fire, and get a full list of who all those constituents are. Lovely. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that this has been helpful. I know there's also some questions that we asked of you. We hope that this helps you develop your strategy for donor acquisition, and I hope that you're able to put some of these practical tips in place of how you can increase your donor acquisition rate and improve your donor acquisition, your new contact and your donor acquisition. Thank you again. Before I forget, I do have these resources linked in the slides. So all of the resources that you see on this list, all of these are linked to the slides, and everyone is going to receive an email with the link to the recording and the slides. So you can always refer back to it for any of the tips. If you want to follow along with any of the tips, you can do that with the recording. Thank you again for being here today and spending part of your afternoon with us. We hope that we see you in more of our nonprofit success webinars coming up. Keep an eye out for that email in your inbox, and we hope to see you in another one of those again soon. Have a great day. Bye.